Hello everybody, my name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today, you and I are going to be having a very, very important discussion on cultivating some key mechanics on composition. This applies to any genre. It applies to classical music. It applies to house. It applies to drum and bass. It applies to, whatever the heck that you want to do. But basically what we're talking about is relating a very old idea, a very classical idea that people teach in academia to the DAW and how that translates. And what I'm talking about is something called audiation. This is something that Corey, my partner, had taught me about a long time ago. And what I'm giving to you today is an adaptation of how to focus on building just not only the concept of audiation, but also how to use little head starts or certain things to get you along the way in case if the development or the cultivation of the imagination part is a little bit tricky. Okay, so what the heck is even audiation? So typically in classical music, audiation is hearing something in your head and hearing multiple instruments, a symphony or whatever, and then translating that to notation, right? Translating that to something that is like, I hear an F major 7th chord or something, and then being like, boom, there it is. Now, the beautiful thing about that is that when it comes into, I guess just pure composition, a lot of composers can actually hear something in their head and translate it almost verbatim. Electronic music is a little bit different, and I want to explain that, and I want to explain why we might need a little bit of help or a little bit of I guess handicap when it comes into this stuff. So when it comes into classical music, there's a lot of experimentation that has happened in the past. People are constantly pushing the envelope in that genre as well. So I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but what I am saying is that those instruments have been around for centuries. So when you're talking about things that are symphonic, orchestral, whatever, it's a lot easier to imagine these sounds because you don't have to focus so much on the timbre or the expression of what those sounds are supposed to be, right? Like a piano is really easy to imagine because the piano has been around forever. When it comes into imagining these sounds in the electronic world or in the experimental sound world, a lot of times we come up with these sounds, I guess, that we've never even heard before. And so there is this middle ground that we need to try to find of how do we imagine sounds in our head in a beat that we've never heard before? And how do we come up with compositions to that will utilize that? So we've had a lot of conversations back and forth with this, and the common ground that we've kind of come to is placement in notation and composition. And this is going to go into the first thing that I wanted to talk with you about, which is writing in silence. Now, writing in silence is not as a means of I'm going to make sounds that I've never heard and make it whatever and then put this. No, it's actually utilizing clips like this and putting together something that you think would sound like what it might be in your head. So for example, here's a great, a great exercise. I've already got this prepared for you, so it should be relatively easy, but look at this. If this is supposed to be a kick and this is supposed to be a snare, and this is supposed to be a hi-hat, what kind of beat does this look like to you? We're at 85 BPM, and that is half the time of 170. But if I play this, right, you're not going to hear anything, but just look at how the bar scrolls. What do you think that is? Can you hear in your head what that's supposed to be? Can you hear the beat that I've created, even though we don't have the sounds? So here's the next piece of this. You can imagine this, or you can compose in this way without having to focus on what these things are supposed to be. If you start to utilize this to develop the imagination of, it's kind of like when you make stuff and you just use crappy sounds and you're like, I can always replace the sound. But check this out. That'll work. Why is this so long? Holy cow. So let's say I place all of these kicks where it's supposed to be. And again, don't worry about the sounds because this is purely for academic cultivation or whatever. But if I place this here and I place this here, and then we can grab a snare, doesn't really matter what it is. Sure. I don't know why that one always comes up, but I'm not mad. Okay, even without the hi-hat, right? Take a listen. What is that? You guys know this beat, right? Now, question, let me know in the comments, were you able to tell what this was just by looking at it, even without the sounds? So when you're composing, when you're doing stuff like this, you can utilize a lot of silence and just utilize the sense of placement. You guys have seen me do this a lot before. Let's say I'm writing a bass line or something and I'm like, man, I want something to go here, but I don't know what it is. Like a lot of times I'll make a tiny little clip like this and say, like, just for whatever reason, I'm like right here, I'm like something goes here. So we use it on a micro scale quite a bit. Now, this can scale, right, to a lot of different things. And the goal is to try to think about creating these arrangements and these placements or whatever with a lot of different instruments and not just the drums. And generally speaking, the better that you get at audiating, of imagining what you hear in your head, even if it's just the placement, even if the sounds are muddy and you can't exactly tell what that is, because that's not the approach. This isn't about hearing a sound in your head and designing the sound. This is about hearing a song in your head and figuring out how to translate that as closely as possible. But you can do the same thing with bass, right? So let's say I hear a bass line in my head and I don't really know what I want it to be, but I can just start writing some clips out. So this is gonna get cool, by the way, so check this out. So I know that I've got this boom, 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 boom. And so if I just imagine a beat, so like doom, 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 right? Doom, 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 doom. There, boom, doom, doom, doom. So it'd be here, boom, doom, doom. And then let's just keep it relatively simple, but I can add another track that's supposed to be a different sound or something. And then right here, oops, I can imagine this being like a womp right here. So what I've just done is I've imagined a call and response here. Boom, 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 wah, boom, 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 wah, boom, boom, wah, boom, boom, wah. Right? And use this in order to start filling in other basses or whatever that I create. But what I'm focused on is the placement of the composition, because this could be anything. It could be a darn, it could be a jerk, it could be a flirk, it could be a badurk, it could be a bwah. It doesn't fucking matter. What matters though is building a rhythmic relationship with the initial idea that we've created. So yeah, of course, like you could go and find a bass or whatever, you know, and just do something really stupid like this and fill this in or whatever. And like, let's just say that these were like neuro basses and stuff and blah, blah, blah. But what you could also do if you're trying to build and work on a call and response is to not do this. What we can do instead is we can say, hey, I'm going to grab any sample, anything. Because we have the placement, this can be anything. So I can find some percussion. So I could say, okay, well, I'm going to take this and use that. And then let's say I want to grab this little guy. And what I'm going to do, because I heard that sound, is I'm actually going to split these guys up. So now what I'll do with this is find something, some kind of effect or whatever. That's pretty cool. So if I were to use this and maybe just place this within this, now I have audiated the placement of a call and response. So now I've got this call and response of this thing that's repeating every time. I've created a loop, and it seems so obvious, but when you're talking about building bass lines and you're talking about building a relationship with everything else, that's kind of what you're getting into, right? But the thing is that you can use this as a means of like, yo, I'm stuck. I don't know what to write. And if you're worried about like the, you know, the quality of how everything sounds, you can literally write an entire composition in silence and then say at some point or whatever, like, I want this to, you know, have the craziest drums I've ever heard, or I can just replace all of these clips with sounds from Splice or something. But the thing is that once you start filling in the gaps like this, then you have something that has a relationship in a call and response. Now, is it the coolest thing ever? No, but it's a means of cultivating. It's a means of cultivating. Now, the other thing is that when it comes into specific genres, like the way that I think about genres is that it's all composition, but sometimes you need the right key to get through the gate, you know? So I'm not going to try to make halftime with a classical mindset approach. You know what I mean? In the same way that I wouldn't try to play a piano like a guitar. I wouldn't try to play a guitar like a piano. You kind of have to think about what is the right approach into how to do this stuff. And so via Audiation, which is, this is a much more direct translation of this, because I was teaching a lesson about this last night, is I have this beatbox. And for me to try to develop groove and to try to say, all right, well, I've got a beat in my head, sounding it out, singing it out. If you got a melody, sing it, vocalize it, and record it. Because if you listen to this, right? This is the translation of like what we ended up making out of this. Hold on one second. Make sure that nothing else is playing. What I did was I put the placement down. I did a couple of movements here, but I practiced just making sure that this had a good loop. So it works. Well, now look, I just did the same thing. I placed the kicks here. I've got some snares or whatever, but now we have You see what I'm saying? So with this is like such an incredible tool to utilize for building compositions and stuff. And I think that as a beginner, or like if you're struggling with finishing tracks, studying composition is actually going to get you way further than being a badass at sound design. And I'm not here to tell you what you should do. I'm not here to tell you like this is the way, and because it's not. But this is something that I wish that I would have had when I was trying to, you know, just get better at making music. And as you know, some of you know, we're doing a 30-day drum and bass challenge. Some of you know that we're making an 8-bar loop every single day, and I'm utilizing a lot of these things to try to think about placement, or I'm trying to audiate the ideas that I have. If I'm making drum and bass and I come up with something very clinical, like I'm like, okay, how do I imagine, or what do I like, what do you imagine, right? Because if you're so specific of like neuro bass, and then you sit there and try to do the thing, that's a different story. That's a different approach. But if you can imagine the movement, or the placement, where the beats are supposed to hit, that's why sometimes sequencers can be super helpful, because they help you figure out where the placement is supposed to be. Just know that it doesn't have to be so rigid of like a specific grid. But yeah, like you write in empty clips and then you just replace the sounds, you know, and you're like, oh, this sound doesn't work. The placement is supposed to be there, but now there's a relationship behind everything. There's a relationship of where everything is supposed to be. So for example, I didn't think that this idea was cool, but what if I were to, you know, move this over a bit? So, you know, well, now it actually kind of seems like it has, like, it's playing along with the drums now, right? But the thing is like, okay, well now we can just replace that with like some kind of neuro bass and just change it. I'm trying to find one that has a good fundamental. Right? So let's just take the first part of this and say, all right, well, I just want it to be there. Just want it to be there. So whatever this is, it's not the best sound in the world or whatever, but now I've replaced the sound again, so. Or maybe I want to add to it, you know, so now I'm getting more ideas. So if I go dun dun, or something like this, and cut that off, and move that over here, it's not looping or whatever, but this is the kind of thing that happens whenever you start placing this. And it's not about how cool the sounds are. It's not about like, you know, is this the right thing or whatever. It's about the composition and the placement. I guess like if I were to show you kind of how I did that on this most recent thing. So this was the day 13 submission. It's probably my favorite submission from the 30-day challenge. But what I did was I wrote down this drum pattern like this. This is going to be loud, by the way. And in my head, I said, okay, boom 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 bam boom boom bam boom boom bam boom 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 bam bam boom boom bam boom boom bam boom. And so what I did was I had that idea in my head, so I didn't necessarily have to write in empty clips. But if you listen to the translation about what that was supposed to be, maybe if we unsolo that, then this is what we got. And then I just went back and added some blemishes, right? So the fill and some of the other movements, like the boom, like that was the part that I didn't imagine, but it made sense because I felt that there was a space there in which to fill something out. And the whole point of doing stuff like this is to help fill out more pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to where you can start to guess what you're missing. You can start to figure out, and the problems become more apparent of like what you're looking at, and it becomes easier to solve. Because that's what it is, you know. If you have this idea in your head, then like you start from nothing. You're like, all right, I got to do some shit. Or if you don't have an idea, practicing audiation, you know, literally sitting down away from the DAW and like, I'm not calling it meditation, but sitting down and being like, okay, I'm in my mind's DAW. That's the best way I can say that. And now I'm in my mind's DAW. I've got everything. No technical limitations, nothing. What do I want to make? Okay. That was the first thing that came to my head. Okay, well now we're actualizing that. I've audiated something. I want to hold on to that idea, put it in a recording, you know, or place it or write in silence. There's multiple ways to do this, but by cultivating that, you're not only cultivating your imagination, but you're also cultivating a relationship of how to make stuff start working together, you know? If you're just like hyper focused on a single sound like I was, you know, like the only thing that I would hear in a tune, or I would listen to an entire track of 7 Lions just for that one moment or something. But you have to take a step back and be like, what makes this compelling? And that's often the relationship of the elements put together. A sound is only as cool as it is in context. And so if you practice contextualizing rhythm, pitting different rhythms against each other, and still be open to the experimentation side of things, which I've talked about in reverse on my channel previously with my other talking head videos, you will start to look at music differently. You will. Whether it's better or worse, that's a whole different thing. But if you're stuck, man, like this is something that I really think you should give a try. This is something that I really think you should try. Sorry. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. And I know that it's not like necessarily concrete advice, but if I were to say like, here's your call to action, practice imagining songs in your head that you want to create. Figure out ways to record those ideas as closely as you can, whether it be through silent placement, whether it be through imagining in your head. Don't worry about the specifics of what the sounds are supposed to be. It's about the placement. It's about the arrangement, and practicing arrangement is going to make you a better music producer. I know that a lot of people, myself included, write off of pure intuition and pure spontaneity. But there's always going to be a point where the track starts writing itself, to quote, you know, my mentors and peers. And starting somewhere and having an idea for this can be super helpful. Or like, let's say, you know, this needs a second section, but you've got this to work with. You know, you can be like, all right, well, where is this supposed to go? Like, take time away from the DAW and just like play with imagining where it's supposed to be. Or, you know, take a piece of sound of this or whatever and start playing with, you know, what could I turn this into? If all you have is a really cool bass and you're like, yo, how do I make you know, how do I make this into a cool song? But all you have is just one single sound. How do you make a song around one single sound to where it's like, you know, that's the theme of it? You got to practice the imagination part. You must. That is like a means of cultivation that, in my opinion, is so crucial to bettering yourself as, you know, a better music producer in general, or composer, or beat maker, whatever you want to call yourself. I don't really care. So with that out of the way, if you want to support the channel, alchemy.com. I've recently dropped a lot of new preset packs. The Ableton one is the most recent one. I've got one for Bitwig. I've got one for Phaseplant, several for Phaseplant. Alckemy.com, book a lesson with me if you want to dive deeper into this kind of philosophical stuff. And if nothing else, I would really appreciate if you just like the video and subscribe to the channel, and said hi, pop in the stream once in a while. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, usually in the afternoon, Pacific Standard Time. Thanks, everybody. I will see you all in the next one. Bye.